Hey, hey, hey! Welcome to my cozy corner of the internet. This is Nephilim VA bringing you the 29th chapter of Inheritance, written by A is for Amy 71 on AO3. The first challenge of the sports festival is a dungeon crawl. That's so cool, but also terrifying. I could go into an Izuku-worthy rant about the implications, so I'll stop myself and jump straight into the trigger warnings. This fanfiction is for mature audiences with canon-typical violence and a trigger warning for major character death. If that isn't your style, then I recommend Shades of Green, which is written by Maybe It's Friendly on AO3. It can be found on my channel! Canon Divergence is the name of the game and indulges the what-ifs of Midoriya Izuku having a quirk. With that being said, the chapter summary is as followed. First round of the sports festival! Woo! Now I implore you to sit back and relax whilst I read to you. Chapter 29. Most of them hesitated, but not Karchan. Izuku watched as the explosive blonde dropped gleefully into the pit and out of sight before anyone had time to even register it. Yoarashi and Todoroki weren't far behind, and Izuku knew he couldn't afford to wait either. Any longer and he'd be fallen on by the rest of the group as they decided to jump. He used a leap with his levitation to get above the crowd and over the pit, then allowed himself to drop. There was hardly any light from above when he landed with a stinging concussion to his legs and feet, but he hurriedly moved against a wall in case anyone else dropped from above. A moment of groping found the entrance to a tunnel, and a brief flicker of light. There was the echo of a crackling sound, and Izuku knew that must be Karchan, using sparks from his quirk to light the passageway. It could also be Todoroki, but he didn't often use his fire, stubbornly so. Judging by how far ahead the light seemed, it stood to reason that there wasn't much ahead of him until a little way down. He put his left hand against the wall and noted that they were generally smooth, as if cut by machinery, and used the wall as a guide to advance them as fast as he dared. He could hear more people behind him, and he knew he couldn't afford to waste a moment, so he broke into a run, seeing the faintest hint of light as he rounded what seemed like a curve in the wall. There were lights on the floor at regular intervals on either side of a large cavern, with columns of rock or cement jutting up from the floor like a dense forest. The light didn't reach the ceiling, nor could the far wall be seen from where he stood. There was no sound of explosions, so Izuku surmised that Karchan wasn't blasting his way through, probably to keep anyone else from getting through easily and catching up to him. Izuku paused for a moment to listen, trying to hear over his own pounding heartbeat and breathlessness. There. A groan of effort? Pain? Someone was still making their way through! Izuku activated his levitation quirk once more, and rose to see if the ceiling was near enough. Was there a reason the lights only shed light a couple meters off the floor? His hand touched the rough rock of the ceiling, and he crawled forward along it, discovering that the pillars weren't as tall as they seemed from the floor. He crawled straight ahead, keeping focused on the far side, where the light grew dim again. A few of the pillars were tall enough for him to push off with his hands or feet, and that gave him some speed. It became obvious that the passage narrowed again to another corridor, which in the dim light seemed to only be about 2 meters wide. He allowed himself to drop to the ground once he passed the pillars and entered the corridor, with his left hand on the wall again. Suddenly, he ran at full speed into a dead end, and had a curve around the back the way he came to find another way. He made it down an estimated 50 meters before he came to a T, branching off in 2 directions. Damn! Which way to go? He stood at the center of the corridor and stepped into one that bisected it, then clapped his hands loudly. One direction only echoed a single time, while the other echoed several, so that was the path he chose. His heartbeat seemed to echo his steps as he moved forward as fast as he dared. There was another sharp turn, and he ran through a curtain of some kind, straight into a brightly lit room that blinded him for a few precious seconds. It was sheer luck that had him skidding to a stop at the mouth of a deep pitfall that he couldn't see to the bottom of. The other side was about 10 meters across, and there were 3 thin wires stretching across the expanse, and 3 nylon cords dangling from the ceiling. The ceiling appeared to be covered in needle-sharp bristles, similar to porcupine quills. "The wires it is," he muttered to himself, bending down to see how taut the one nearest him was. A moment later he was thanking all the gods and powers that drove the universe for his balance quirk, because the first wire was an illusion. The second one too. The only one that was real was the one on the far left, and it seemed to sag a bit, but held fast when he tested his strength against it. He took a deep breath and began to walk across. His balance and agility came in handy again, and he made it to the other side relatively quickly, only to be forced down onto his hands and knees to get through the next passage. A true crawl. One moment he was crawling quickly as he could, and the next a trap door on a hinge caved downwards and dumped him into a strange environment. "A bull pit?" he asked aloud at first. But he was wrong. These weren't just balls, they were bubbles. Tough enough to withstand him landing on them, but rubbery and slightly luminescent. When he gained his feet, he trudged forward, surprised at how much the bubbles resisted him. They came up to his shoulders, but there was only about a half a meter over his head, so he didn't know if levitating and crawling on the ceiling would work. He tried anyway and was surprised when the bubbles followed him, clinging to his clothes and to each other, causing him to drag them. He spotted a rope ladder hanging down from a hole in the ceiling, and assumed that was his way out. Then he spotted another in the other shadowy corner. It was kind of like trying to navigate a dark place by candlelight. He couldn't tell if there were other ladders to exit by in other areas, so he went with the one closest to him. The struggle to each ladder was costing him time, and he was sweating now. He reached the ladder and pulled himself up into the hole, causing one of the bubbles to pinch between his body and the edge of the hole. It popped surprisingly loudly. "Gah!" Izuku cried out. Then he clamped his eyes and mouth shut for a moment, as his senses were assailed by the most putrid smell imaginable. A green mist was spreading below him, and sinking around the other bubbles when Izuku opened his eyes again. His eyes streamed with tears, and his mouth tasted like sweaty feet as he forced himself upward, only to hit a ceiling. There was no latch or seams. A dead end. "Damn it!" he swore and let himself drop down to the floor, intending to try the other ladder. He could hear indistinct voices now, getting closer. He hurried as much as he could, sticking close to the wall until he was under the other ladder. He jumped with a touch of one for all, keeping his hands extended above his head in case there was another dead end. More bubbles burst, but Izuku was through the hole and into the next chamber before he got a whiff of whatever had been unleashed. He felt sorry for the people who hadn't made it this far yet. It was worrying that he hadn't run into Kachan, Yoarashi, or Todoroki yet, but there was nothing he could do but soldier on and hope that there were other passages that led through the maze. The next surprise was the floor suddenly sloping down, and Izuku finding himself skidding on loose gravel and sinking ankle deep in what he hoped was water. There was zero light. He reached his hands upward so he could levitate and find the ceiling, but the ceiling was closer than an arm's length above his head. Still, he could crawl just above the pool of whatever, and avoid getting soaked in questionable liquid. He allowed his body to levitate until he was horizontal, and began to advance, only to find the ceiling had been greased. There was no traction! Great. He lowered himself back down to the ground and ran a few meters back down the corridor the way he'd come, counting his steps as he went. With a running head start, he levitated back up at the last possible second with a boost in his launch from One for All. He skidded across the greasy ceiling, grunting when he hit uneven patches, until his hands touched a wall. He released his levitation and slid down the far side of the tunnel, landing back into the liquid at ankle depth again. He had no idea how deep it had been, or if anything had been at the bottom, but he wasn't going to worry about it now that it was behind him. He noted that there were rope lights on the floor of the narrow passage again, leading him onward, and he followed. It wasn't until he got a breath of what smelled like fresh air that he felt like he might have actually made it to the end. He could see daylight ahead and sprinted forward, his heart picking up pace as he ran. He could hear cheering crowds from the arena and could make out the shape of a door. Then it came to a stop at what could only be described of a portcullis of heavy steel, barring the way. He took a deep breath and charged up one for all. The verdant sparks crackled around him, and he drew back his fist, punching the wall next to the gate, making the cement wall holding it in place explode outward. He climbed through the hole and sprinted for the corridor that he could see led to the arena. Above him, Yoarashi was riding a whirlwind at great speed. An explosion later, and Karchan was right on his heels as well. Todoroki right beside Karchan, and they seemed to be smacking at each other with explosions of ice and fire, each trying to slow the other down. Yoarashi could see what was happening, and sent a gust of wind that sent the two boys tumbling, and almost did the same to Izuku, but Izuku kept his balance and charged after him. The entrance to the arena forced Yoarashi to leave the air to make it through the gate, and Izuku burst across the finish line without knowing if he had beaten Yoarashi or not. He just let his body tumble across the cool grass and stared at the blue sky while his chest heaved, trying to suck in enough air. "Holy crap, man!" Yoarashi said, leaning over Izuku with a wild grin. "Where'd you even come from?" Izuku looked up at Yoarashi and burst out laughing. Mostly it was out of relief, but also partly because the other boy was covered from head to toe in neon-coloured splotches of paint. "I take it there were multiple exits," Izuku heard a female voice say. "Possibly Yaoyorozu." Yoarashi was grinning at Izuku's hilarity, and Karchan and Todoroki were shouting at each other, and Izuku finally struggled to sit up. "Who won?" he asked, looking around at the students still pouring through the gate. "The judges are just watching the replay because it was so close," Midnight told him, a huge grin on her face. Present Mike was going crazy in the MC booth, and the crowd was a thunderous roar that Izuku had been basically tuning out all this time. But it flooded back when he looked at the giant screen above him that read, "Please stand by." "That close?" Izuku asked to no one in particular. Yoarashi sat down beside Izuku in the grass while they waited, and they compared a couple notes with each other about some of the obstacles. "That explains why you stink so bad," Yoarashi said cheerfully. "And why you look like a rainbow threw up on you," Izuku countered. "You know it probably wouldn't have been so close if you had stopped to use the key for that last gate," he pointed out. "There was a key?" Izuku asked with a puzzled look. That made Yoarashi bark out a laugh that had all eyes turning to them. Izuku laughed at his laughter, and it began to spread to a few others as if contagious. A few seconds later, Present Mike's face appeared on the screen. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a decision from the judges. The preliminary elimination round winner is a tie. Yoarashi Inasa of Class 1B and Midoriya Izuku of Class 1A. "Yes!" Yoarashi shouted in triumph. He jumped to his feet and hauled Izuku up with him, lifting Izuku off of his feet in a crushing hug. A hug which left Izuku with splatters of neon paint on his gym uniform and grease all over Yoarashi's arms. Karchan was cursing up a blue streak, and Todoroki simply walked off to the field to a water cooler to get himself a drink. The two victors were surrounded by friends and classmates congratulating them, and Izuku's eyes scanned the crowd, looking for the box his father should be sitting in. Instead, he saw All Might in his true form smiling broadly at him, and Sir Nightai looking very pleased and applauding along with the crowd. Wondering where his father had gone, he let himself be buffeted by the crowd of students while they waited for further instructions. "Those with minor injuries, please go to the first aid tent to be seen," Midnight directed, pointing to a white tent with a red cross on it with her flogger. "The rest of you will go back to the waiting rooms, where there will be refreshments and replacement clothing if needed," Cementos told the kids who didn't need any medical attention. He seemed to be looking straight at Yaoyorozu, who was wearing a tube top and black biker-type shorts instead of her gym uniform for some reason. All of the girls were glaring at Mineta, and Izuku wondered if he even wanted to know what had happened with that. "Staff will be freeing those students who are unable to escape from the maze, and we will resume the festivities in 30 minutes, where the first 50 finishers from the preliminary round will advance," President Mike told the audience. "Feel free to visit the concession stands or stretch your legs while you wait." Izuku was surprised to hear that there were some who got trapped, but supposed it made sense. It was supposed to be an elimination round after all. For now, he wanted to at least air out his stinky clothes, or change them, and rest for a few minutes. "Zoo!" Izuku turned around to scan the crowd at the sound of his father's voice. He finally caught sight of his father's green curls and waited for him to catch up. "Zoo, you were amazing," his dad said, slightly out of breath. "I'm so proud of you." Izuku ducked before his father could ruffle his hair. "I'm not sure what might be in there," Izuku warned. Even with the Teflon, there was some pretty gross stuff. "I saw that. There were dozens of screens showing all of the passageways. There were lots of different ways out, but even more ways to get lost or trapped. It was brilliant," his dad gushed. "I don't have to ask if this is your father," Ida said, approaching with Uraraka and Yaoyorozu close behind. "Yep," Izuku said with a grin, knowing how closely they resembled each other. "Everyone, this is my dad. Dad, this is..."
"We're his friends,"
Uraraka chimed in with a little wave.
"I'm Uraraka Ochako."
"I'm Ida Tenya," the speedster introduced with a stiff bow. "It's a pleasure to meet you."
"I'm Yaoyorozu Momo," she said politely. "Please forgive my unconventional appearance."
"Young lady, I admire the way you handled that situation. You would have been justified in clobbering him instead of just tossing a net over him," his dad said, making Izuku do a double take back at Mineta, who was being shouted at by Jiro, Arshido, and Hagakure.
"The time was of the essence,"
Yaoyorozu pointed out wryly.
"I hate to be rude, but I must excuse myself to go and change."
Izuku's dad nodded and waved as she trotted away, giving Mineta a wide berth. Izuku made a mental note to find out what had happened, and see if something needed to be done about the sticky-haired boy. Izuku was class rep after all. "I didn't mean to take time away from everything," his dad apologized to Izuku and his friends. "I just got so excited that you won that I couldn't help it." Izuku grinned widely, pleased that his father was having a good time. Uraraka looked like she wanted to pat his father's head, and Ida looked amused. "You two were amazing too. Your quirks are so cool," his dad told them. "We should be getting to the waiting room," Izuku said when the screens overhead began to show students being pulled from pits or unstuck from giant spider webs. His father dashed away then, and Izuku let the chatter of the other kids flow around him as he considered what the next round might be. The waiting room had a small changing area for each gender, and Izuku grabbed a new uniform from the row of lockers with his number on it and rid himself of the foul-smelling one. He splashed some water over his hair and wasn't surprised to see some dirt wash down the drain. The bright side of having a Teflon-like coating was that it only took a few moments to towel his hair dry. "Did everyone in our class make it through the first round?" Izuku asked when he came back to the main waiting area.
"No,"
Uraraka said, looking sad.
"Aoyama fell into a pit and couldn't make it out, and no one's seen Koda yet."
Izuku bit his lip in worry.
I guess there aren't any animals in an underground labyrinth to help. I hope he's okay. He'll be retrieved regardless, Yaoyorozu said, freshly clad in a new uniform. The judges keep track of all individuals, in case they need help.
Izuku nodded. That made sense. He looked around the room and saw Mineta crouched in a corner, looking traumatized.
What happened there?
He asked quietly.
That little pervert tried to use his hairballs to get a free ride on Yamamo's back,
Mina said indignantly.
And she had to shed her jacket and pants to get him off.
While creepy, it was a viable strategy, Izuku supposed. He was going to ask why everyone was so angry when Uraraka picked up the explanation.
Then he got all excited and tried to jump on her again, saying he hoped this time she'd end up naked.
Izuku's lip curled in disgust. When Uraraka said the word excited, she had pointed to her own crotch, and Izuku got her meaning immediately. He had the urge to haul Mineta out into the hall for a little talk himself. Ida, however, was already on it, and had gone to give the diminutive pervert a long lecture that was probably worse than any beating.
I fended him off with a weighted net,
Yaoyorozu said, hugging her middle.
But it cost me some time.
I'll make sure to give a report to Sensei about it, Izuku promised. That's just wrong and he should face consequences.
So, what do you think the next event is gonna be?
Kaminari asked, joining the conversation and changing the subject.
That underground thing was insane. Did anyone else get stuck in that room with the stink bubbles?
They discussed some of the things they'd faced in the maze and speculated on what was to come until it was time to regroup on the field. Whoa, Kirishima breathed. They emerged to find floating stages filling the center of the arena. There were at least 12, all of them at varying heights and widths from the ground. They were all different sizes and had different features, like the rooftop of a city high-rise, or a grassy field with a pond. One a parking lot complete with cars. They each looked like they had been taken from somewhere else and dropped into the air to float over the school's arena floor, which was covered in a fine layer of red powder.
This looks like something out of Super Smash Bros.,
Zero observed with wide eyes. That's freaking awesome!
So it's gonna be a melee battle?
Uraraka asked, sounding both worried and excited. That's what it looks like, Izuku said. I'm sure they'll tell us. They didn't have to wait long to find out. Thank you so much for watching this video. I appreciate all the support you've given me. What the fuck is wrong with Mineta? Can he be expelled already or beaten to a bloody pulp? I know I shouldn't say things like that, but Yaoyorozu didn't deserve such disgusting treatment. A little life update, haven't done one of those for a little bit. I have an acting exam soon and I'm pretty excited for it, but I am very underprepared. If anyone can send me some good luck, I would highly appreciate it. All credits go to the original creator of this fanfiction, A is for Amy 71 on AO3. I would highly appreciate it if you gave this video a like and you subscribe to the channel and you hit the notification bell to be notified of when I next upload. There is no pressure to do so though. Thank you for visiting my cozy corner of the internet. Keep growing my sunflowers. Mwah.